Ah!
It's okay. I'm right here.
I can see that. What happened?
That knife, it nicked your jugular. You know, Jerry, when somebody yells heads up, you're not supposed to actually look up.
I don't remember that.
Anyway, you're lucky I was there. You lost a lot of blood.
What?
Oh, yeah. You got 3 pints of Kramer in you, buddy.
Yeah, let me know.
All right, and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we have the lovely Allison Graham here, and we are going to chat about Seinfeld, the show about nothing. Now, for those of you who had the good fortune of being alive in the 1990s, and by being alive, I mean, you know, at least being, you know, at least 7 years old by 1993 or 1994. You would have been able to understand and process what was going on with that show, because believe me, there are a lot of things that I learned just by watching Seinfeld. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and please share this video with everybody that you know. It definitely helps with the algorithm. At least that's what I hear from other YouTubers. And let's go ahead and get started. Allison, how are you doing on this fine Sunday afternoon?
So good. How are you doing?
I'll tell you what. I had a bit of a Seinfeld moment last Sunday because and seriously, like as it was happening, I kept thinking, God, Larry David could write this, and he wouldn't have to make any of this up. So what happened was last Sunday, I had to go run some errands, and I got into my car, right? And I started it, and I was like, okay, it's not turning over. So I checked the battery. I'm like, okay, the battery's dead. So which is weird because I had the battery changed in February of this year. So so I called AAA, and they come in and fix it. They replace the battery, but then they're like, so we noticed that this one little clip right here, it's cracked, right? So we're going to have to replace that little clip for you, because that's probably the reason why it's not charging all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
So so the technician, he spends like a few minutes trying to trying to remove it, and he's like, yeah, it's kind of rusted through and through. I'm gonna have to call my supervisor on this one. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And this is like 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, by the way. So he calls his supervisor. His supervisor gets in like 20 minutes later, and by the way, his right arm is in the sling.
Oh no!
His right arm's in
How
the
is he
sling.
gonna spin or work the little wrench?
This is where it gets interesting. So he walks over and he looks at it and is like, okay, so what are you trying to do here? And it's like, yeah, we're trying to replace this little clip here because it's old and it's cracked, and it's not charging sufficiently. So he takes the socket wrench, and he's got it in his left arm, and he's trying to remove it. And I'm standing there in silent amusement, just watching the whole thing happen. I'm like, he called his supervisor, knowing that his supervisor's arm's in the sling.
Oh my gosh!
And they're chatting. By the way, the guy's like, "So are you sure you can do it?" Like, yeah, I can do it. So he takes his arm out of the sling, and and if you've ever injured your arm, if you ever broke your arm, you kind of have to hold it in a certain way, because if you move it at least 1 centimeter the wrong way, it's gonna be painful, right?
Yeah.
So he's got his arm at this weird angle, and he's trying to do his best to get the little nut out, because it's rust through and through. Now the top part is moving, but the bottom part is just staying still. So after a few minutes, they're like, yeah, we're going to call the manager on this one.
And then the manager has a hook for a hand.
No,
is that the twist?
No, so they call the manager, and they're like, and they explain everything to him, and they're like taking pictures, and they're like, yeah, so we're trying to remove this one little one little nut here that's rusted through and through. And the manager is like, yeah, I'm maybe 45 minutes away. And the guy's like, okay, so we don't want you to drive all the way here. Can you just talk us through it? And after 10 minutes, they're like, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna have to come and see what I can do here. So it's 2 o'clock by this point. So they've been working on this for quite a while.
Oh my gosh.
So like by 3 o'clock, the manager shows up. So now it's three guys leaning over my car, and they're trying to figure out like how to remove this one little bolt, and it's rusted through, right?
Did you
So
feel
what-
like you were a part of the fixing experience by just watching them do it and saying, "Yeah, that should work. That should do it," like Seinfeld says?
Well, but wait, there's more to it. I'm only getting started here. So the manager, he like spends the next 20 minutes trying to like, use a socket wrench, which I'm a little confused because you've already got two guys who used a socket wrench, and it didn't work. So then they decided to get the power tools out, and they're like, after a while, like the manager turns to me and is like, "Yeah, so I'm gonna have to go to plan B on this one." And I'm looking at him like, "Okay, plan B," and he's like, "Yeah." So he takes out a power tool, and it has like a saw blade on it, and he basically cuts through the little bit, and he ends up having to replace one part of the bit with another part, so they kind of have to Frankenstein it. Oh, I should also mention too, he somehow cuts himself, and he's bleeding all over my engine, by the way.
Oh
So
my
so
God.
that other bits of blood on the engine, and also, if you remember too, last Sunday was raining, so we're all standing outside while it's raining out out there. So after a while, like everything looks good, like they technically did replace the little bit, but it's kind of like weird and Frankenstein. And the manager turns to me again, and he's like, "So basically, this is something that we kind of had to do on the down low because it, I really wouldn't say anything to the manufacturer because what we did isn't really supposed to, be done. But but if you do take it to a garage, see if they can try to like, cut through it or something, because that thing is like rusted through. It's stuck on there." So I'm like,
not the nut rust.
so I'm like, okay, that's good to know. But flashback to a few hours earlier when the first technician was trying to remove that bolt. He's dropping bits and pieces into my car, right? So me being skinny as I am, I'm able to like snake my hand through to like grab the bits of the wrench to like get it back out. And the saying, going in's easy, getting out's pretty hard. Like because with my car, because like the older Nissan cars, you kind of like have that grill at the bottom with like the little like openings that you can sort of like reach your hand through. So I'm able to like stick my hand through pretty easily. But then like when I grab the bit, I'm like, all right, so I've got it, but I'm trying to like wiggle my hand around, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, am I going to be stuck to my car for the next few hours? Like, this is not good at all. But I managed to, like, wrench my hand free. Thankfully, you didn't have to do what James Franco did in 127 hours. But now my right arm, you got bits of skin coming off. Now, the good part was it wasn't bleeding, but it looked really, I mean, Allison, I'll tell you, it was a miracle that there wasn't any blood, because like skin was just coming off all over the place. Just because I had to basically, because I wasn't going to let go of that wrench piece, because I didn't want a piece of someone's tool rattling around in my engine. But at the same time, it's like I have to get it out somehow. I can't be nice about trying to rip my arm out of this thing.
Yeah.
So I did contribute in a way. I did manage to retrieve someone's tools from from the bowels of my car.
Oh gosh.
But it was just like, but as I was planning the panel, I was thinking, I could definitely see something like this happening to George. Like,
yeah.
like,
I would think that's more of a Jerry thing, and they all end up joining him to hang out while the mechanics are trying to get it out.
And this actually reminded me of the episode, because I actually watched it afterwards, of the episode where Elaine is stuck in her apartment, because they were trying to do something with the cat next door, and the cat was making all this noise, and Elaine ends up pulling the knob off of her apartment door, and she's stuck. So like all the guys are just hanging out, and that's what it reminded me of. It's like, it's just basically me and 3 AAA mechanics who apparently have nothing better to do on a Sunday morning and afternoon than trying to get rid of this one little bolt
Oh man.
That's
Well,
like,
good thing they helped you. That's so nice, you know.
yeah. And Allison, here's the cherry on top. So the reason why the battery went dead was because the brake lights in the back were on. Now, it turns out there's this little plastic bit that's supposed to go at the under the brake pedal, and that got loosened off. So when they replaced the battery, I was like, okay, I'm good to go. But then like later on that night, I'm looking out my window. I'm like, why are my brake lights on? Like that shouldn't happen. So
Yeah.
so because I had to work, I asked my mom to take the car to the garage. So I get into the car the next day and I start it, and it's the same thing. Like the car won't turn over. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like I gotta go through this again. So I called the triple A rep, and they come and give us a jump. And my mom takes it to the Nissan garage, and she's like, yeah, it's all good. It turns out they had to replace the little plastic bit under the brake, and now it's good to go. But so far to this very day, I'm a bit apprehensive about getting behind the wheel, because I'm like, I have no idea of what's going to happen with this car.
Oh no. Well, good luck to you in your car. I know car drama is like the worst. I have absolutely had similar issues, but not that bad. I didn't have to stay there that long, but
I was gonna
yeah.
say, you never had to stick your hand in the car and like hope to God it'll
I
come back
wouldn't.
out.
I just wouldn't. I'd be like, well, the car. I would be like Jerry and throw the keys in the car and like look at someone and be like, take it, because
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do this. Like, that being said, which Seinfeld character do you think you're like the most? I am very curious about that question, because I
Oh,
think
that's easy.
who?
That's easy. I'm gonna get this out here as a prop. Can you
Oh,
guess?
Kramer.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
That.
I'll tell you this too. I wish I brought it out earlier, but I actually have a button up shirt that's got lobsters on it, just like what Kramer has.
Oh my gosh.
That
Kramer is actually like the coolest one. I like the way he dressed. He's such a hipster.
I mean,
And
Elaine calls him a hipster doofus, like at one point. And
yes.
and if you think about it, there's this one episode where George describes Kramer perfectly. He's like, I'm just paraphrasing a lot. His whole life is a fantasy cap. He just like, doesn't have to worry about money. He just falls. Either he doesn't worry about money, or he can just fall backwards into money. He mooches off his friends, and he gets laid all the time. Like, that's a fantasy camp. People should pay to live like him, because you have no idea of how he's making it in New York. Because even in the mid to late 90s, New York was a pretty expensive place. So it's such a mystery as to how Kramer like manages to like afford to live there when you don't really see him working, because the only time you ever see him working is at H&H Bagels, and I think that was just for one day, and then
Yeah,
and then he
he's
quits.
a businessman. He's always like coming up with the next big idea. Like he is well, you know what's so interesting? Because I remember when I was a kid and I watched Seinfeld, Kramer, he's very eccentric, right? He's like the weirdo, and everything he says is very weird. Well, I was rewatching some of it, and I noticed that actually a lot of Kramer said what he says now is like normal. Like, for example, one of the like jokes that I was watching last night, an episode from like the first season, and he said, I have an idea, a great business idea, build your own pizza. And I'm like, that's
Yes,
a great
yes.
business idea. Like, that's not a joke. And it's like the audience like laughs, and it's like, that is like the idea. You go in, you build your own pie. And I'm like, Mod Pizza, places, like these places exist. And then he said, like something about how, well, cancer, is an industry, man. So they can cure it. They're just not going to, because it's bad business. And
Yeah,
everyone laughs, and I'm like, no, like people
because
talk like everything he's saying, it was just futuristic. He was just ahead of his time, because these are the things people just say now in normal conversation. It's not a joke.
Here's my question, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine. Do you kind of feel like Kramer kind of informed the way that millennials thought and spoke later on? Because I feel like
No, I don't think they meant to do that. I think it was something that they thought, like they were doing a character that at the time was far out. Like, this is how these people talk that are super like weird and progressive and hipsters, right? They were
Yeah.
like what like maybe we perceive, like if we were to write a sitcom and we were making fun of the most eccentric Gen Z kid, or something. That's what I think they thought it was. And now it's just like, I think that person already existed. So
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, because when you look at Kramer, he's pretty much informed by I wouldn't say degenerates, but like the social outcasts of the day. Because obviously, you see bits of the beatnik in Kramer. Obviously just by his attitude, but but you take like different elements that people would, to your point, would be off-putting or not unconventional, and kind of put it into that one character, and he sort of becomes like a parody of that.
mhm.
Because
Yeah.
because how often do people look at Kramer, as sort of like this lovable, goofy character that, in their mindset they're thinking, no normal person would ever behave like that. Like this flies against the
Yeah,
grain of
no,
society.
he's a clown. He's
Yeah.
definitely yeah, he was over the top, and that was his job. That was his role, to be like 100% over the top. He's the jester. He's above and beyond, because Jerry is actually very subdued. He's very,
Which is ironic because he's the comedian, right?
yeah, but he's everything's at a distance with Jerry. Everything's very calm. Everything's like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm critical of that. Whereas Kramer's all in. He's the opposite.
Well,
Yeah.
it also represents a different style of comedy too, because Jerry represents the intellectual side of comedy, whereas Kramer is very physical, right?
Yes.
He kind of
Yeah.
he kind of harkens back to the heyday of of comedy, where where back in the day you had people like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton who were doing all these pratfalls and doing all these absurd stunts, and it's like, and it's like, obviously they retain that element, but they have Kramer doing it. So
Mm.
they, so the way I see it, as much as Kramer is sort of seen as this progressive, sort of futuristic kind of character in his thought patterns, at the same time he's sort of harkening back to the way that comedy was done way back in the day.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, for me, Kramer is sort of this like off the wall character, and they're very much aligns with the way that I am. um, and like I said, I mean, he's both conventional and unconventional at the same time, and he's such a complex character because just when you think you understand who Kramer is, he throws another curveball. Like, I mean, for instance, he talks about having run away to Sweden. As a teenager, he was in the army briefly. I mean, his entire apartment is like this. I mean, there's almost like this Michael Jackson quality to his apartment, like a Neverland Ranch kind of thing, because you go in and you don't know what to expect, right? Because it's
Yeah,
all
it's very random.
it's always shifting, because on the one hand you've got this hot tub, and then at another point it kind of looks normal when you look at his bedroom, but then he turns into the Merv Griffin set later on.
Yeah, he's he's wild, but he's also like probably the most fun. Like, everybody was always laughing the most when he was around, and he's a good
Yeah,
wild card.
but he's also the least worked up character too, because everybody else is sort of locked in their own struggle.
Oh
Obviously
yeah.
Jerry, George, and Elaine, they're well, George and Elaine, especially because we see their working lives on screen. So they're very much having to do this very delicate dance, which means they have to like put on this persona in order to survive, whereas Kramer he's unfiltered.
Oh
um
yeah.
so which character, Seinfeld character, would you say you identify with the most?
George, definitely George, because, well, I'm more George when I have like when I'm working and on my day job. I think he's so funny. I relate to him so much, particularly just the episodes where he's like, I have a job interview and the interviewer left in the middle of it, and I am like, did I get it? I mean, I assume I got it. And so he just shows up like he has it. That is, that's very me coded. Like, I feel like I would absolutely, I just feel when it comes to corporate work, like work I don't want to be doing, right? Work that you're
Yeah.
doing, like, this is a check, this is benefits for me, this is something that's not creative. It's literally just, let's get the day job started. I feel very awkward and, or like when he quits his job and then realizes he doesn't have any alternatives, so he comes back and pretends like nothing happened. He's just so funny to me in terms of everything with his work. Everything with his work, or when he shows up to work and he doesn't know what to do, so he just has a briefcase and he just acts like he's working all the time. I don't do that, but I feel like I have that feeling of, am I doing this correctly? I don't know. I just love George so much, and I love how he won't tell Jerry what he wants. He'll always just say, I want it if you don't want it. He just is, he can't be direct. He has this sense of humor about him. Everything he does is so self like I don't know. In some aspects he's very confident, but then he loses that confidence later. And it's just this to and fro constantly with him having a huge ego and going to absolutely no ego. He's so funny to me. And I identify 100% with his work struggles, his corporate struggles from back in the day when I would have a day job. I find
So
him hilarious.
so so what I find interesting about George is, is the fact, and I totally agree with you. What I find interesting about George is the fact that that a lot of the things that he does, he starts off on a high, but then he does something. He sabotages himself, and then he ends up suffering because of it. Because
Yeah.
because a lot of the things that occur for the most part, it's because he did something to screw himself over. Really.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, it's also he is so afraid of direct communication. That's
mhm.
where I'm a bit different than him. I can absolutely confidently maybe I'm more like a Jerry or something, but I just feel like I notice he thinks he has all this nerve. Like he wants these grand things, but then it falls apart because he doesn't want to be direct about it. He just wants it to kind of come to him, and he's very silly in that way. I found though, I think George though really turned a corner. Like everyone got really grossed out by him, and things turned a corner when Susan, who is way too good for him, uh the episode with the envelopes, and she passed away because of the cheap stationery that he insisted on.
Yeah.
I feel like that was like the turning point where a lot of people were like, I can't do this anymore. I have to like, because they were so like repulsed by that idea. And but I'm very similar to Georgia. I'm like, okay, I know this is supposed to be fancy, but I want like the cheapest thing. Why does it cost so much? Like, why is this like this?
I
Let's
mean,
just get it done.
especially true now, given the whole inflation thing.
Oh
So,
yeah, like, but I think people should be paid for their work, but like I'm not getting paid for my work, so I get very frugal, and I think he's just, but that really turned a corner for him. And personally, I felt like that after that it was like kind of hard to watch. So I watched a lot of like the first few seasons of the show, and then when it gets over there, I'm like, all right, I just kind of like you kind of
so
fell off
so
a
that
little
leads
bit.
me to my next question, because Seinfeld ran for 9 seasons. It
Mhm.
started off in 1989, and initially was it was an experimental project, because because Larry David, the way that Larry David approached and the way that Jerry Seinfeld approached the show, it it it, it, it wasn't following the convention that most sitcoms were following, at that time, right?
Mhm.
Because because for the most part during its nine season run, it, the characters were very much static. There wasn't any growth. It wasn't like with, say for instance,
Cheap.
Cheers, where where we got to see the personal growth and development of the characters. um and what I love, what I love about Seinfeld is the fact that it was one of those shows where it wasn't afraid to be who it was, right? Because and I think you can attest to this too. But a lot of the sitcoms that we were watching, in the late '80s and early '90s, were pretty much generic. And we mentioned this when we were talking about Parks and Rec before we started, because for the most part, most of the studios were content to just take a template, a model of what works, and sort of like maybe like put some variations into it, but for the most part, you can recognize the basic structures of it. Like, say for instance, you can recognize what Cheers is, or you can recognize what Home Improvement was, or you can recognize what gosh, there were so many.
Well, 88, like, but right before it came out, because I think Seinfeld was 89.
Yeah,
So
it came out in '89. Yeah.
So right before it came out, it was a lot of family stuff, like, Growing Pains. It was Family Ties, Wonder Years. It was a lot of this family dynamic going on, like being kind of pushed out, that Roseanne, like things being pushed out there.
But you could also make the argument that that Cheers also fell into that same category, because because even if it wasn't like a family in the traditional sense, it was still that family structure, because you could sort of still recognize Sam is like the father figure, and then Diane is sort of like the mother figure, and et cetera, right?
Yeah. And then Seinfeld, though, to me was more modern, because it was like a friend group that was like, this is like chosen family, and this is the New York experience. This is people that they have families, but they're not on that track, right? It's more of like life, more that for people now, right? Like, we have our friends as our closer family, our roommates, or things like that, and then we do see our parents and things, but then we're like, okay, I'm good for them for a while. Like, we need a vacation for my family.
Right.
And I think that, yeah, so in some way that's where it was very new when it came out. By the time it ended, though, I mean, everything resembled that. Will and Grace was so like that. Friends was so like that. Like, we had a bunch to choose from that was more about people who work and live eccentric kind of lives in the city, and that became more aspirational than a family show.
Right.
Uh,
So it's kind of like a family without being or acting like a family, really.
yeah, they weren't a family. They were like, they were like chosen family, in that they saw each other all the time.
Yeah.
That's who they chose to be in relationship with all the time, right? Like, was that friend group. But it didn't have a dynamic like that was feel good, or, oh, this is my dad and he's so nice, and he's guiding me through life. Like, no, this was a complete rejection of all that. Like, no one is guiding us. We're on our own. And we are very critical of everything that's being thrust upon us, and every structure that's being thrust. Like, why do I have to behave in this way at this particular moment? Why do I have to be nice to these people? Like, it was a complete criticism and kind of rejection of
Yeah.
that family lifestyle. And so, yeah, it was very new in that way, but by the end of it, it was not.
Yeah, because at that time it was calling into question all of the social norms and conventions that were pretty much accepted, not only in society but in film and television.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, TV was still following the trend that had been set since the 1950s with Leave It to Beaver and I Love Lucy. So you could sort of and even with shows that sort of broke the mold, they still clung to pretty tightly to the model that had been set. I think Seinfeld was probably one of those shows that completely broke away from that traditional mold to kind of do its own thing. And to your point, by the end of the 90s, there were a lot of shows following that model because it was pretty successful.
Yeah.
Especially Friends and Will and Grace. So I do want to talk about like why we love Seinfeld so much, because because there are just so many things about that show that when you watch it, you're like, I could pick like a million different things. I mean, for like I said in the intro, earlier, I mean, Seinfeld for me represents childhood, because when I was growing up, that was the show that came on a lot when I was a kid, and it was one of those shows where you kind of got a glimpse to see what it was like to be an adult, right?
Mhm.
Because 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 my parents, they were huge fans of watching shows like Sanford and Sons and 227 and Who's the Boss, and it kind of showed like this sort of idealized version of what it meant to be an adult, i.e., you owned a home, you had a 9 to 5 job, you had kids, and you were responsible, and if you got into hijinks, you kind of you were kind of like, oh wow, I gotta play the straight man on this one, like you're the center of calm.
Yeah.
Whereas with Seinfeld, I felt like this was the first show where they said, you know what, you don't necessarily need to grow up. You can still you can still hang on to those childish things, which obviously isn't always a good thing, right? Because but it did kind of show this, at least for me, an alternative to being adult was you didn't necessarily have to do what Tony Danza or Sam Malone or what anybody else did on on other shows. You could still have this protracted childhood, and we actually got to see it kind of reminded me of those PSAs from way back in the day. You remember where someone would like crack an egg into a frying pan, they would say, this is what drugs does to your brain. Seinfeld was kind of like, this is what happens when you have an extended adolescence or you're in a state of arrested development. This is what can happen.
Mhm.
So for me, that was the thing that I really, really liked about it, was the fact that you had these 4 characters who, even though ostensibly they were living adult lives, they weren't necessarily behaving as adults, right?
Yes, yes, they were very childish and hung up, like they were not ready to embrace the family structure, as we were saying before, of becoming like, now that I'm this age, I'm going to become get married, settle down, have a family, and be a teacher myself, or something like that. They were in their own struggle. But and what I really liked, I was also like a kid that was raised on Seinfeld.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why my parents allowed me to watch it when I was a kid, because I specifically remember being told that I wasn't allowed to watch Friends, but I could watch Seinfeld. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like, why? Like, this is so like not. I think it's because they wanted to watch Seinfeld because it was more funny, and they didn't find Friends funny. And when you're a kid, anything that your family finds funny, even if you don't get it, you're gonna laugh along and try and figure out. So it became part of our sense of humor in my household. And I think what I really appreciated, it did make you feel a little bit like an adult, because it was an adult show. This is what life is going to be like when I'm an adult, like you said. And which is so funny because, as you said, it's like they were actually kind of childish in a way, like because they weren't owning up to some responsibilities, and they were really like not having maybe uh
because as a kid you could sort of recognize yourself in the characters, because I mean and
yeah.
you probably have experienced this when you were little. I mean, how many times did you like get into trouble and you're like, yeah, that wasn't me, that was Jimmy over there, I didn't do anything.
Yeah, it's very much that, especially George. And that's why maybe I related to him so much in my earlier years working in corporate jobs, because I felt you show up and you don't know what you're doing, and you're really afraid people are going to see through that or fire you. And so watching George, that I really related with that when I was first starting out. But now that I am older, I would like to think I can communicate more directly. I don't feel as insecure about everything I'm doing. So I've maybe grown up from that. But oh my gosh, it hysterical when you're a kid and growing up. And Elaine too, like the way Elaine dates, and like is this guy sponge worthy? I don't want to waste a sponge on someone. Like, it's just hilarious, like these little nuances of your everyday life just get kind of, they just really tinker with it and make jokes about it in the best way. And but I notice it is kind of like, I don't want to say the worst part of you, but it's the most critical side of you. It's the darker side of you that's like that, someone that's not optimistic, right? Like, I'm not going to waste a sponge on this person if they're going to be like not great, you know, like, or they're not long term because I only have so many of these. Like,
It's
that's,
very narcissistic.
yeah, it's not a great thing to think, but it doesn't mean you don't have those thoughts. It's just an indulgence in that darker side of you. And I think that's great. That's why it was so different at the time, because I feel like comedy was more like, I don't know, just more of, it was not even that funny. Like when you watch shows, that sitcoms from that time, like Full House or something, it's so not, it's like cornball. It's
I mean, I mean, they're basically dad jokes because
yeah, a lot of dad jokes.
well, another thing too, because I was watching I was watching the CNN documentary about the '90s, and there was this one episode where they were talking about television, and they interviewed one of the writers, and the writer said, the number one rule about Seinfeld was no hugging, no learning, which which pretty much fits. I think pretty much fits the ethos of Seinfeld more than that age old adage of a show about nothing,
Mhm.
because it's just one of those things where where these people never formed any deep personal connections. They just happened. It was one of those things where you're the best that I've got, so I might as well just deal with you, but I'm still going to keep you at an arm's length. And you especially get that from these four, well, three of the four characters anyway. I kind of feel like with Kramer, like he wanted a genuine connection with the others, but they kind of just said, yeah, I mean, I'm good over here, Cosmo. You can just do whatever
Yeah.
it is you do over there.
Yeah, it rejects the there was no development for them, right? Like no character development, which is why in the end they got what they got. You know, they met the end, because it's like if
So
you don't learn, you don't grow into a better person, you're gonna meet some trouble. And I thought that, even though I know that was a very criticized episode, I do think that they were trying to say something like, we're not saying this is the correct way to live, you know, like we're not right by doing this. So if you relate to us, look inwards. But yeah, I like that. No, what was it? No learning. What did you say? No learning,
yeah,
no
no hugging,
hugging.
no learning. Yeah, because and I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, because they never. I mean, they never really, they never really saw each other in an affectionate way. And there's this one episode. I think it's the little kicks where Elaine is talking to that young lady from the party, and she's telling him, she's like, yeah, George is like this awful human being, and he's like this that, and Elaine's like, but you and George are friends, and she's like, yeah, and Elaine's like, yeah, we're friends, and
Yeah.
I'm like, that pretty much just like summarizes the relationship right there. Like, yeah, they say they're friends, but this is like how they feel about each other. And and to add on to that, you remember that episode? I think it was like season 6 or 7. It's when Elaine talks to that rabbi about how she really feels about George getting engaged, and then
Oh
like at the end
yeah.
of the episode, where where the rabbi basically does his like public TV thing, and he talks about Elaine's problems, and George is watching it, and I'm like, yeah, that again, that pretty much encapsulates how these characters interact with each other. Like they're just
Yeah, they're not happy for
conniving.
each other. They're not happy for each other when they get something. They're not and even though the whole show is a revolving door of romantic partners, they're not lovey on them. Like George
No,
never falls in love, even if he's engaged. Like they don't, you know, it's all about the sex or getting to that one interaction, but it's not about actually having a long-term relationship, even if they act like it is. I mean, Elaine, even with Putty, it's always about criticizing that person, or they're good enough for right now, but I want something better. But they never, but every single thing the other person does, like especially with Jerry, it's like, okay, throw them in the garbage, not good with them. And so again, why I was watching this as a child, I have no idea, but but
it's a
it's
cautionary
funny,
tale.
I guess. Yeah, but as a kid you don't know that. You think
No,
adults know everything and they're teaching you like how to be, you know. And it did seem like a more honest representation of life, because when you watched like these perfect families on sitcoms at the time, and they were like, all lovey, and they didn't have any real issues with each other, it's like, this doesn't reflect my home. So growing up, seeing Seinfeld being adults and really saying what they thought and being super critical of everything and not liking everything felt more real than the other stuff. So you kind of looked at them like, oh, this is how it's really going to be. This is like what dating is like, it's this revolving door. And in some ways it can be a little bit, especially with like, oh, I would love to see a Seinfeld episode where they have to use a dating app or TikTok is around, like I don't even know how they would survive. Like it would just be so neurotic, everything was so neurotic. But Kramer would be on TikTok 100%, and he'd be like a social media sensation.
Kramer would be into QAnon because there was this one cold opening where he and Newman are sitting in the park smoking cigars, and they're just talking about all these conspiracy theories. And I'm looking at, and when I was watching, I'm like, I kind of get the feeling Kramer, even if he would have been involved in some way with January 6th, like.
No, I didn't see him as conservative. Do you see him as an uber conservative like that?
No. I don't see him as an uber conservative, but I kind of see him getting involved with like the conspiracy theory crowd, because you remember with January 6th and the fallout, everybody's like, yeah, the people involved were like huge QAnon like conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, but there's so many conspiracy theories are vast. Like there are
That's
so
true.
many that people believe in, and I don't think the affiliation, I don't know. I'd have to rewatch it from that angle, but I never got the feeling that that character was like on that track. But gosh.
But at the same time, because you remember that one episode where he like goes to war with the U.S. Postal Service, you kind of think, what? I mean, you have to be a special kind of conspiracy nut to think that you could win a war against the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah, I think he just didn't like to be kind of taken advantage of or feel like he was playing into a system, I think.
Yeah.
But
the way that but the way he went about it though, like wouldn't you say like that's a bit over the top,
Oh yeah, well he's Kramer. But yeah. I think that there are so many conspiracy theories that the progressive hipster crowd believes in now that it would be more, I don't know, more like one of those. I think he would be more likely to be one of those people that doesn't believe that the sun is real. He thinks it's a projector light bulb that the government put in the sky. I think he's more like that.
Do you think maybe he also might prescribe to the whole flat earth thing?
I don't think he would do flat earth because I think he actually knew a bit more about science, but I think he would believe that like in the government conspiracy, like that the sun's not real anymore. It burned out years ago. Like he would think that, I think. I don't know. That's just maybe it's my own biases being projected on it.
Well, I think we can turn to the age-old conspiracy that NASA never really landed a man on the moon. It was just something shot in the Hollywood backlot.
He would think something like that, maybe. Yeah. So if we made, is this a question of if we made Seinfeld now and they're older, or is this if we made Seinfeld now and they're the same age that they were in the original show?
Well, actually, let's actually approach it in a different way, because technically we already, if you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, they actually did something like this already, where we saw that the character is much older. I think that was season 5 of Curb. I'm not entirely sure, but the whole season was basically centered around a Seinfeld reunion and Larry trying to write, I guess, an epilogue to the whole Seinfeld thing and kind of make up for what happened with the whole debacle of the series finale. Which by the way, like if you haven't already watched the series finale of Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David ends up in jail.
Oh, really?
And then Jerry has to come bail him out, and as they're walking away, because Larry's put on trial in Georgia for something, and he's found guilty, and they put him in jail, and then Jerry comes and bails him out. And as they're walking away, they're having this little like quip. They're like, maybe if we've written it, maybe this is how we should have ended Seinfeld. And Jerry's like, yeah, yeah, maybe we should have ended it like more like this. Um, I haven't watched it in a while, but I would highly recommend, if nothing else, at least checking out season 5 and and the series finale of Curb, just because the way they did the way because it was kind of like done like a show within a show for season 5. I think. Hang on, let me just take a look at that. But while I'm taking a look at that, I think the I think what they did with that Seinfeld reunion, it felt like closure, really.
Mm.
Oh, season 7, sorry, season 7. So, um, but so yeah, the entire story arc with season 7 was the Seinfeld reunion, and I felt like that was kind of like a pretty good way to like give Seinfeld the perfect send off that it needed.
Mm.
And we also find out that Elaine had has a kid too. I won't ruin it too much for you.
Yeah,
But
I was like, oh my
but
gosh, that's so much.
but when you mentioned the whole dating app thing, um, George actually develops an app called iToilet, because you remember in that one episode where he says, I can find like the best, most perfect toilet like on every city
Oh yeah,
block.
yeah,
So he develops that, and I'm like, of course he would do that because he's George.
yeah.
Um,
That's a good idea.
but to get back to your point, so let's just say, for argument's sake, right? And this is a thought experiment that you and I can go hog wild on. Let's say, for instance, they decide to do a revival of Seinfeld, but instead of casting the actors from the 90s, they get a whole new cast, right?
Oh my
It's
gosh,
kind
that'd
it's
be crazy.
and by the
Who
way,
would those actors be?
it's kind of meta too, because there was I think it was like the last season of Curb where Larry is developing a show called Young Larry, where he's trying to like find the perfect actor to play a younger version of himself as a kid. So so um so yeah, let's run with that. So obviously it would take place in New York. I
Mhm.
think so. So the thing that we have to appreciate about Seinfeld is the fact that it was working with the technological limitations of back in the day. Because looking back on it now, you and I can say, wow, things were a lot more difficult way back when we were kids. Because obviously, because if you needed to call someone, you either had to like go home, and pick up a phone
Yeah,
and
they
dial,
have
or
like
go to a
the
phone booth.
voicemail. Yeah, he had to do his answer machine. I was just watching the one where he's screening calls because he doesn't want to talk to his childhood friend that he liked to play ping pong with, and he's like avoiding him. But then Kramer answers his phone for him, and I'm like, gosh, it's a totally different lifestyle when you have answering machines. You can be away from your phone because you're traveling. Just
But they worked with but they worked the humor around those technological limitations. So let's run with this. So obviously they decided to do Seinfeld 2024, right? We've got social media, we've got apps, we've got smart technology and everything. Do you think Seinfeld would still be funny if they as it would be today, or do you think it would be less
oh
funny?
yeah, no, you could make a great show out of that because we have more people are more critical than ever. If anything, I think the hardest part of it would be trying to make jokes that people don't already say online already because they'd be competing with like, you can just go on TikTok and watch a bunch of funny videos of people making those same jokes and criticisms. It'd be like really keeping up with that, right? And making it better than that. But there's so much to criticize about technology and our lifestyles that definitely could do it.
my main
You know,
concern my main concern here is whether jokes today can be as witty and as cutting now as they were like 20 or 30 years ago, just because now we're living in an environment where people are a bit more sensitive, right? So and I was talking to a friend a few days ago because we were talking about Mrs. Doubtfire, and I was like, they could never do something like Mrs. Doubtfire today because it would just be perceived as transphobic. or even the joke that they did in the first Ace Ventura movie. They could never get away with that today.
Well, I think that's interesting because Mrs. Doubtfire still plays. Everybody still loves Mrs. Doubtfire, and no
Yeah,
one finds it
I
transphobic.
know.
But so why would it be considered transphobic now when no one actually finds that movie transphobic? And actually, when you watch Jerry Seinfeld, it's not super. I mean, it wasn't problematic in that way. The things that they were being critical of were things that were just, small, shitty things about the normal experience. They weren't getting into anything that deep.
Mhm.
If anything, the show would probably be criticized for not being deep enough because we have so many heavy issues right now that criticizing the little bullshit doesn't feel maybe like the best thing because we have bigger problems basically.
That's true.
So maybe it might feel a little bit too, because now everybody's getting everything feels so heavy on our shoulders and urgent that seeing people bitch about things like, their partners, their dates, habit, or so, their voice or, whatever it is that they were annoyed with at the time, it just wouldn't be as big a deal. I think it'd be like, that's small potatoes. Why are you bitching about that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would probably be the hardest part of making it now, that situational thing. But I think definitely be done by people more clever than me. Like when they're waiting for a restaurant, they're like waiting for a really long time at the Chinese restaurant and they're just like trying to figure out what to do and they're starving. It's like, or losing their car at the parking lot.
Yeah.
I mean, their stuff wasn't that deep, but it was so funny because it's just like making fun of everyday shit that happens, and then taking it to the next level. So I definitely I don't think anyone's too sensitive for that.
And you think, and so you think like the premises and the humor that made Seinfeld so compelling back then could still work today.
Yeah, because they were actually sensitive. Remember that? What was the episode where they kept saying, "Not that there's anything wrong with that," like
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's that one with the with the writer for NYU. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and they were like, "Oh, like I'm not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that." Like they were always very sensitive about everything that was deep, deeper. It was the other stuff that they were like they were more critical of like how you have to behave on an airplane than they were about anything, problematic. They actually stayed very far away from, well, not very far. There was one episode with what's her name from Will and Grace, Deborah Messing, and she made that joke at the end, like
is this the anti-dentite thing?
Yeah, she's anti-dentite, and then at the end she actually is like horrible,
anti-Semitic,
anti-Semitic and racist, but and that was the very end. Right. It was the last moment, and I'm like, that's the closest they got, and they were making fun of it, like, yikes! Now I need to break up with you because of that, not because of. So they were on like the good side of things, for the most part.
So you think like a lot of the social issues, that we're experiencing today, especially with like anti-Semitism, could sort of like get played. They could dial it up to 11, and it would still be relevant, still be as edgy and as cutting. Because you remember there was that one episode where Uncle Leo is like accusing everybody of being anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. You remember that scene where they're at Monk's Cafe and they're eating lunch, and Uncle Leo's like, "Oh man, this hamburger's undercooked. This guy's the cook must be anti-Semitic," and Jerry's like, "I can't even see you, dude."
Yeah.
And then Jerry goes on and makes fun of it, and like Lydia's laughing, and so they break up because he accuses her of being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I think that would play. I don't think it would be considered edgy or anything though. Like that show, when you watch it now, it's not. I don't feel like it's edgy. Like I said, Kramer, who was supposed to be super wild, the things he said were not that far off from how we just talk normally now. So,
but I mean, like contextually, back in the day, it would have been seen as like something new and novel, or at least unconventional. That's something that you don't really.
Yeah, it was a joke. It was a joke. Yeah. They had build your own pies. Like, how are you going to do that? Like, I don't know why that was even a joke. I'm like, that's a great idea. But but I guess it was before anyone had seen that sort of thing done. So it just seemed completely silly. But yeah, so I don't know if any sitcom would, I don't know if it would be considered that edgy, but I don't think it would be that cutting. I think, have you seen the show like Arrested Development
Yep.
with Jason Bateman? Like that's like a show that was pretty, I mean, it was a sitcom, but it was I wouldn't say it was, maybe that wasn't edgy. Maybe that's not a good example, but there's some, maybe I haven't seen enough sitcoms lately to know which one would be like, oh, Lil Dicky,
Yeah.
Dave. That's like one that's pretty edgy, but I don't know if Seinfeld, if you remade it today, if it would have that same effect.
So you think it'll be pretty conventional by today's
Yeah,
standards?
absolutely.
Okay.
It would be more heartfelt. It would be more, I think they would end up having to break that rule of, no learning.
No hugging and no learning.
Yeah.
So then here's my other question. So so obviously Seinfeld was was a scripted show, and then its successor, Curb Your Enthusiasm, was more more of like everybody ad libbed their lines. They knew what the basic story structure was, but they had more of a freedom. Do you think if they were to do a Seinfeld revival today, do you think they would follow the Seinfeld model of scripted TV, or kind of follow more of like this is what the story structure is, just go nuts with the dialogue?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, to remake if you were calling it a remake of Seinfeld, like if that's how you're
Or
marketing it,
revival, I guess you
a
could say.
revival. Yeah, if you're marketing it that way, then yeah, you've got to have some semblance of the structure there, in my opinion. Like whether that means it's because it's single cam and 4 characters, I don't know, but like if you're doing it that way, you have to have a semblance of the original show. So yeah, but I think that I just bring up Arrested Development because that's the last show I watched it gave me the vibe of Seinfeld. That was very the characters did not like each other. They were not nice. This is not how families should behave. People are committing crimes and being a little bit eccentric, and then there's um it was so funny. It was just so good. It just reminded me of that feeling I had when I watched Seinfeld of like, these are not good people. This is not how you should behave. But it's got so many great one-liners and things that just stay with you that are good jokes.
I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously the cast, the cast was much bigger, but they pretty much followed the same, the same philosophy that Seinfeld follow. Now, for me, I would argue that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia kind of fits the ethos of Seinfeld, just because.
Oh yeah.
Just just because it doesn't really follow the family structure like Arrested Development, and you also have the feeling that everybody is constantly coming up with their own schemes and they're constantly backstabbing each other while trying to accomplish their goals. So I feel like I feel like at least at least with Arrested Development there is still this inner sense of loyalty because they are a family, because you do get, because obviously you get the feeling that deep down there is like this semblance, however small it may be, that they understand, oh, deep down, he's my brother, or he's my son, or she's my mother. So I really don't want to go too far. Or whereas with the gang at Patty's Pub, it's like there really is no connection, because even though Frank is legally, Dennis and Dee's dad, he has no more of an obligation to them than they have any obligation to him.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I see it. But I would make the argument that it would sort of be that if they were to do it, it would sort of be a mix of scripted and ad lib. I feel like for the most part, like there would be like certain certain scenes where they would have to play it straight, i.e. they would have to follow a script, and then there would be if it was like minutia, like like just chatting about random things, I think like if they were at Monk's Cafe, they would probably like just roll with it, and the director would just be like, oh, all right, that's cool.
Who would you cast in that?
Oh, now this is something I've been thinking about for the past 6 months.
Well, then you must have a good answer because I've only just thought of it.
So I, so now my references are a bit dated just because I'm still following. I'm still thinking along the lines of who are the top millennial actors in Hollywood, not who are the top Gen Z actors in Hollywood. I gotta update that. But if I were to, I'm gonna start off with Elaine because I feel like she would be probably be the easiest to cast.
Hmm.
If we were looking at Elaine, I would probably first of all, I would probably cast a British actress in this role
Really?
because the British actresses they've got some pretty mad chops. I'm trying to think of who's the girl that played Nadja, Natasha Dimitriou. I think she would have, the the weight and the gravitas, well, not gravitas, but she would have the comedic chops to play someone who's a bit who's a bit as loose as Elaine. Because if you've ever watched that TV show What We Do in the Shadows, she she sort of has this Elaine quality to her already. So I could easily see her playing Elaine Bennis in that way. Obviously she would do it in an American accent, but but for the most part I really don't see her like having to struggle too much with that.
Mhm.
Now the now I will say this, like if it, like probably like the biggest change I would see them doing with Elaine is they would probably put more emphasis on her family. Because I think out of all the characters we really don't know that much about Elaine's family, because we know a little bit about Babs, Kramer's mom, and obviously we know a lot about the Seinfelds and the Costanzas. So I think if they were to like write for Elaine, I think they would probably have her do more of an interaction. So they probably, I don't know, they would probably give Elaine like a brother who like occasionally pops in or is constantly referenced.
Hmm.
Um,
See,
now
I would go to a totally different like side of things where I'm like, I don't want her to be like the old Elaine at all. I just want her to, or the original Elaine at all. I just want
yeah.
her to be who's really funny, especially if you were talking about ad-libbing, and who's very funny, who is very someone that we could see getting into these situations and want her to have to dig her way out of it, because that's what Elaine gets into a lot, right? Like, she's like with this boss that's like crazy and is making her like do crazy errands or something. She constantly gets into a pit and has to get out of it with Mr. Pitt. And
I was thinking of Peterman. Yeah.
Kiki Palmer.
Oh,
Imagine Kiki Palmer having to serve like, a billionaire, or like having to do things that Elaine did in those situations, be part of corporate, and like how critical she could be, how funny she could be, how down to earth she can be. I just think she would be so funny to watch in those
she
situations.
she would be very she would bring like the sort of more sassier attitude towards that role, I think.
I mean, yeah, I think
But
Elaine was,
that's not a bad thing though. That's not a bad thing.
no, I think Elaine though wasn't that side of things. Like Elaine was more what's the word I would say? I wouldn't say Elaine was that sassy. I think Kiki would be more like, if you want her to, like Kiki Palmer playing Elaine would be so funny. Not going into that idea of like, oh, she's going to be this stereotypical, black woman or whatever. It just being the character of Elaine would be so funny, because Elaine didn't, she was kind of like similar to George in that she could not just confront people. She could not just say what she wanted. She did not go up to George. Actually, there was a whole episode about this, right? Like where she has a friend who has a hairstyle that's super old, antiquated, that she hates, and she just can't bring herself. No one can bring themselves to say anything because they're all such chicken shit. So they have bring Kramer around to break the news. So
Yeah, that's right.
Elaine
That's
was
right.
not really that. So I wouldn't say Kiki Palmer would bring that to it, because that's not what's asked of that character. But the way she can be just so comical, just pick things apart analytical, like, and the physical comedy that comes with Elaine, with, you know, getting the ink on her hands from the purse and trying to do things. I just think she would blow it out of the water. That's
So,
who I would like to see in that.
so let me ask you this, because like I said, with my concept of Elaine, like, you know, I mean, obviously they would try to like explore more of her backstory and her family, right? Do you think, you know, like in your version, do you think that's something that they would go with, or they would just kind of like just
Oh,
stick
totally.
solely
I
to
think that
Elaine?
would be a great idea because it would give her some more context and things to work against. Uh, in the show, you're right. Elaine in the show didn't really have any family uh situations the way the other ones had, and then she was more like the professional situations, like, or relationship, but she was
Mhm.
always like in the context of her work and being in the corporate world and dealing with how she couldn't tell people things, or if she would, they would just take it the wrong way because she didn't know how to give bad information, like bad news. Like Molly Shannon with the arms that don't swing, you know, it's like she doesn't know how to say it, but she needs to. So yeah, that would be a great aspect to work with for her.
So,
What about Jerry? Who would be Jerry?
ooh, I'm not going to say John Mulaney, because he tried to do his own show like Seinfeld. It blew up in his face. So, hmm.
You know who
See,
I would think would be
yeah.
good? Would be Bo Burnham.
Oh, now tell us why Bo Burnham.
Well, he's a stand-up. He does stand-up.
Okay.
And as we were talking about, the show was very about like being critical of how we live our lives, like very everyday shit and technology. And Bo Burnham recently had a comedy special, or like during COVID made a comedy special about uh you know, technology and the internet and, you know, white girl Instagram. Like he has a real great perspective on shit. He goes really deep. He's a person that could make the show as edgy as Seinfeld was felt at the time, and dark. Um, and I think, and also just because he does live comedy and things, he would have that aspect to him as well. So I think he would be a great person to do. I don't know. That's what I would think in my mind's eye. That's what comes to me.
I was thinking of Dimitri Martin, honestly, because
Dimitri Martin. Let me look him up.
yeah, he was big back in like in the late 2000s, early 2010s. Um,
Oh, Dimitri Martin. I forgot about him.
yeah,
He's
you know,
old now, though. He's
I
51.
well, I'm telling you that I mean that's why my references are dated.
Not that
I,
being 51's old, but he's like
no,
the
no,
older
there's
than
nothing wrong with
Jerry.
that.
Jerry was in, there's nothing wrong with that. But Jerry and the crew, they were in their 30s, right?
That's true. That's true.
So I was
So
trying to keep it around that.
yeah, so let's just say, for argument's sake, we got Dimitri Martin at a younger age, right? Uh,
Okay.
I know I'm cheating a bit here, but let's just roll with it. But you know, but when I think about it, Dimitri Martin does have this deadpan quality to him that Jerry sort of has, because for the most part, Jerry, I mean, Jerry doesn't really react, you know, too much to a lot of things, but when he overreacts, it's over like the littlest of things, like for instance, someone peeing on a sofa. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but I really wouldn't, flip my lid like, like you did in that. But
Mm.
but I could sort of see, Dimitri Martin having, having that quality of being deadpan for the most part, but he can sort of explode. I can see like this manic energy underneath him that's just waiting to come out, like if he's directed the right way. Bo Burnham, I really didn't think about that, but I've seen some of his stuff, and I can definitely see it now. Like I could definitely see him um
Yeah.
doing that
And he's
role.
like 33. So he
Yeah,
has
yeah.
like,
So he's only a few years younger um
what
than
about
me.
Kramer?
So Michael Richards was in his 40s when he took on the role
Mhm.
of Kramer. But I sort of imagine, but in this case, I would imagine Kramer as the youngest out of all of them, because that would sort of be an inversion of of what it was in the 90s, because Kramer technically was the oldest member of the group, whereas here I would sort of cast someone who's like really young, someone like in the either like mid 20s or early 30s.
Mm.
because if you think about it, you would need to have someone who's who sort of have like this young man energy about him to do the things that he does, especially
Well,
with the
that's
physical
funny you
comedy.
say that because I was thinking of maybe Kramer not being a man because it doesn't really need young man energy. To me,
Well,
Kramer's
young
just a
person
wild
energy.
card. He's
Yeah.
just a wild card. It's just like a person that you would keep with your crew because they are so ridiculous and wild and they help you do things that you can't do. Also, Kramer's kind of like the roommate, like he's across the hall, so he's a person that's kind of forced on them from a different world, right? Like they wouldn't choose this, but it chose them. And I was thinking like Fortune Feimster, who also does stand up and is super funny. She's from here actually, well, from North Carolina.
Yeah.
Because she is crazy. She's so crazy, but she's in a great way. And she's very herself. She's got like, like with Kramer, you felt like he was really that person. And I feel like with Fortune, if she came in just as herself but pumped it up a little bit, like physically, the physical comedy, she would be like so funny.
What was her name again?
Fortune Feimster. I
Yeah,
think that's how you say it.
yeah,
Feimster.
yeah, yeah.
Feimster?
I could sort of see her like that because she does have that manic energy about her.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was gonna say like I was gonna go with Rami Youssef on this one. Um,
Rami.
he was in that movie Poor Things, and he hosted SNL recently. Like he's got some pretty decent comedic chops, but but he's about 30, I think 32 or 33, so he's a young man. So like I said, that's why I would
Oh, he
probably
was
go.
in Poor Things.
Yeah, that's right. He
Hmm.
played the he played the guy who was in love with Emma Stone, but the reason but he has this well, first of all, he does have that Kramer quality look
Yeah.
about him anyway, but at the same time, I feel like Rami Youssef is one of those versatile character actors who can if you give him a role, he can take it and run with it and do a phenomenal job. Not to mention he's a great stand-up comedian, and like I said, I mean he's got he's got this youthful vibe about him that you could sort of put him in any situation and he would definitely make it his own.
Hmm.
um now, now that being said, I mean, obviously they would have to do a few things about him to kind of, make him a bit more relevant. But I could sort of, but he can still come off as like this sort of like otherworldly kind of character, kind of like the way Robin Williams was, as Mork when he showed up in
Yeah.
Happy Days and Mork and Mindy. The thing that I would really focus on with Kramer if they were to revive, if they were doing an update, is obviously, well, one, he wouldn't smoke. I think he would just do more of the hookah thing.
Hmm.
I could see him being more involved in hookah, I couldn't see him doing vaping. I just think vaping is a bit, it's not something I would imagine Kramer doing, but I could see Rami Youssef playing a Kramer who
Kramer
like
has
has
a
like,
hookah. Doesn't he have a hookah? And I mean, other than a pipe, he does
yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
like a hookah pipe.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I could see Kramer like going crazy with like having a large hookah collection, and I would definitely like to see more of learning more about Kramer's backstory, because, like I said, Kramer's one of those characters you don't really know that much about. Um, I would definitely like to see him have more of an interaction with Newman, because the interactions that he and Newman have in the '90s series are great. I would love to see them do more with that.
Yeah.
Um, I would probably go so far as to even say, because you know how like Jerry and George, you had that story arc of them being engaged and prepared to get married. I would like to see more of Kramer having to go through that himself, kind of being involved, like coming close to being engaged, then breaking it off, being having that dynamic.
Yeah.
So what about George? I think that's the most difficult one right there.
I know. I was almost thinking, just get the original. He's so good. Well, they don't like, I don't even know
I
if I
will
could.
say this. I will say this. Like, it would be awesome to get Jason Alexander to play Frank Costanza. Like, that would be amazing.
Oh, that would be so cool.
But
Yeah,
not.
that would be
But for
awesome.
God's sakes, do not let Heidi Swinborg back on the set, because I don't know. There's just something about Heidi Swinborg playing Susan that just made me go.
Yeah. I was maybe like I don't know, like a Dan Levy, maybe.
Sort of like go
I
for
think
like a
he's too
gayish.
good looking. Like, yeah, but like that'd be cool. Like that'd be current, you know?
Yeah,
It'd be
yeah.
um yeah, like if we could go that route, or maybe like I'm trying to think of someone like not I know it sounds this isn't meant to be mean, but like not cool. Because George is not cool. You know what I mean? And he's very like that's the funniest thing about him. He's us. Like he's the bald guy.
He's
You
the
know,
everyman.
he's a
Yeah.
little yeah, he's little and he's bald and he's neurotic and maybe like Jonah Hill or something. I don't
I
know.
was thinking, I was thinking, and please feel free to let me know what you think about this. Um, I kind of get the feeling that if you gave the role to Ken Jeong, I think he would knock it out of the park because you remember in Community he played Ben Chang, and Ben was like this absolute like nutty character because you had no idea of what was going on in his head until like he becomes the what was it? Was he like dictator or president of Greendale College? And
Yeah,
he's
it's
like dressed up
so
in a
funny.
Napoleon outfit. I'm like, you know what? If you put Ken Jeong in the role of George Costanza, like that would be perfect because he's such a manic character. But obviously Ken Jeong is like either in his late 40s or early 50s. So it's like you would have to find someone much younger
Well,
because
first of all, shout out to Ken Jeong, who he went to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Duke. So go
hey,
him. Hey,
he grew
NC.
he grew up in but he grew up in Greensboro and he gave the commencement speech at my alma mater, UNC Greensboro. So
So lots of good connections there. I love I love him, by the way. I am a huge fan of him. I think he's so funny. Ever since like The Hangover, Community, Crazy Rich Asians, like he's so everything he does, he rocks it. He
as
almost has
yeah,
the energy though. He has Kramer energy. Like
I can't see him doing Kramer to be honest with you because
no,
Kramer
but he
requires
has
like
that level. He's like he goes to
yeah.
100. Like he's like top of the roast. Whereas and George can go there, but I don't see him doing that. He's like, I don't know. I feel like
Well,
George needs to be in his 30s and
George
like
is like Hamlet. That's the way I see it. He's kind of like the Hamlet of Seinfeld because it doesn't matter like what actor you bring in, like they'll be able to make the role their own and kind of go with it. But I see what you mean on that.
yeah, he's just a little bit I don't
Now I'm
know.
thinking because like I said, like the closest actor I could think of is Ken Jeong because he's got that because he's capable of playing this maniacal character, but at the same time he can come off as like normal.
Yeah.
Shit, because I
You know
was gonna
who's
say
another one I just thought of for Elaine
yeah,
is Michelle Wolf.
Michelle Wolf.
She does stand up. She's so
Okay.
funny. She's fucking she's like one of those people that can be really mean and very cutting, but in the best way, like in a way that you're like that needed to be said. She's very funny.
Oh, her. Okay. You know what? I could actually see her doing that because because the thing that that we notice about Elaine is that she's very sharp tongued. Like she doesn't. I mean, to your point, like she can be passive aggressive, but when she's around like her peers, like she just
When she's around her peers, people that are equal to her, like Jerry and stuff, yeah, she'll shit
she cuts
talk.
them down. Yeah, she'll
Yeah,
cut
she'll
them down
shit
to
talk to
size.
them, but then she loses her nerve in front of other people. I don't know about George though. Maybe if you get comments, ask people in the
Yeah, I mean,
comments.
I mean, anybody in the comments below, let us know who do you
Yeah,
think.
suggest suggestions. Maybe like a Bowen Yang, somebody like I don't
I
know.
I think I mean I will say this. I think Bowen Yang play could play George like I said, but I'm gonna put an asterisk next to could because I would like to see him do more work in order to justify it. Now,
You don't think
because
Jonah Hill no go? Jonah Hill has that type. Like he's not cool. He's a little bit manic. He's a little bit like you could see him getting easily offended and like be insecure.
that's
Like
true.
he could really I think Jonah Hill is just on such a level that's like beyond sitcom that he's like movie star. So I think it's hard to see him bringing him back into like a sitcom role, but I just think that energy.
What
But
about
feel free to say something better.
what about Beanie Feldstein? Because Beanie Feldstein
Oh,
is his
she'd be
cousin.
yeah, should be good.
So there'll be Georgette or Georgina.
I love
Costanza.
casting things. It's casting things for fun that absolutely is not being made, and it's
So
like,
so here's my all right. So let's go with this because now you've got me intrigued. So all right. So we have our tentative cast, and like we'll put an asterisk next to some of the names because
yeah,
they,
no, this is not set in stone.
but I will say this, like I'm firmly going to plant my standard next to Ken Jeong as George Costanza, like just saying.
Okay.
Now who could you see playing Mr. Peterman, because he is such an eccentric character. Like
Bill Hader.
I was gonna say Will Ferrell.
Oh yeah, Will Ferrell will be good at anything. He'd be more like, what was the old guy's name? Mr. Pitt. Mr. Pitt.
Mr. Pitt. Like if I were gonna cast Mr. Pitt, I would probably go with I almost said Patrick Stewart, but shit, who's that? He's like he's like a pretty big English comedian. See, the way I would cast Mr. Pitt is someone who's like very very deadpan, very straight laced. Jack D. So in the UK, Jack D is this well-known English comedian and TV presenter. So if you watch Have I Got News for You, he's pretty he's got a pretty deadpan expression. I could see him playing Mr. Pitt, because I wouldn't see Mr. Pitt in this version as very pompous and arrogant. I would just see him more as like this like deadpan kind of character who Elaine is trying to figure out, like, what exactly does he want,
Yeah.
And I think for a backup, I guess you could also try a Miss Pitt.
Oh yeah, that would be fun. That would be really fun.
Oh, I was thinking like who to cast if we did like Miss Pitt. I was thinking of
that'd be better.
Yvonne.
There's somebody to pick from.
She played Shirley in Community. You know what I'm talking about? Yvonne.
She's young. She's too young.
You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I would say yeah, but you have to go older than that. Surely, I know who you're talking about. Yvette.
Yvette. Sorry, Yvette. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. No, you have to go like Diane Keaton. You have to go older, like, or Jamie Lee Curtis, or
I was thinking of Helen Mirren, actually.
Oh, she'd be fun. That would be so fun. Imagine if these people would actually agree to do like a sitcom like that.
You know who I think would be the perfect Miss Pitt? Emma Thompson.
Oh, she'd be fun.
Emma Thompson has the comedic acting chops, because if you watch those shows from the
they all do
shows from the 80s,
yeah.
Emma Thompson. So who would you cast as David Putty?
Oh, now that is different. Oh, it's actually not that hard. Who's that guy? What's his name? That is in he was like a wrestler, not The Rock. Although
John Cena.
Yeah. Don't you think he'd be like a good, like, he could be that dumb? He's got a comedic.
Yeah. Because like he did a phenomenal job in Peacemaker. Because like you watch him, you're like, oh, like he's just some guy running around shooting people, but he actually has some seriously good chops. And if you get the right director and a good writer, like, man, he can knock it out of the park.
He would be so funny. Or like Channing Tatum, somebody like buff, like that. But John Cena is so funny.
Because Patrick Warburton, like, he has like this sort of like rugged, like manly quality to him anyway. So when you cast Putty, you definitely want to have someone who's like tall, who looks like he could, live out of the woods and just, and not be fazed by anything. But I was gonna say, like, whoever you cast as like the parents, obviously I would love to see, Jerry Seinfeld playing like, the dad, playing Morty Seinfeld, but obviously you play it very, very different, because but I think it would be a perfectly good way to cast them. And then Newman, who do you think would make a good Newman?
Oh, Fortune Feimster. Fortune, she's got to be in there. I just think she's so funny. And
okay,
and
I'm not going to argue with that.
Yeah, I think she would be really good at that. I'm trying to think of somebody else that's like a good character actor, but I haven't like everyone that I know is more like a movie star right now because I've been watching more films. But like, what's her name, Melissa McCarthy or something? Somebody with that like.
Let me interject here because a lot of the people that they brought into Seinfeld used to work for SNL back in the 80s, like late 80s, early 90s.
Hmm.
So so obviously when you think about it, you got John Lovitz, obviously he guest starred. Molly Shannon, you mentioned that. Julia Louis-Dreyfus was a cast member of SNL, I think from like 85 to 88, I think. And then obviously Larry
Because
David.
they were all the top
Yeah,
TV people, they were
yeah.
and they were in New York, and
So where I'm going with this is I'm thinking you would at least want to like cast at least one SNL actor in Seinfeld, if not in the main, the core four roles, then at least like on the periphery, right?
mhm.
Now I'm just putting it out there. I would love to see Daryl Hammond on, within some capacity. And the reason why I say this because I've been watching the Jeopardy sketches recently, and I just think he knocks it out of the park as Sean Connery.
Oh yeah, so funny.
So I'd like like whatever, like I could see Daryl Hammond coming on and just playing like all these like little guest roles. Ooh, and I was thinking Kate McKinnon too. I think Kate McKinnon would like
Oh
be
yeah.
perfect.
Oh, the guest roles would be like so many to choose from. There's so many great comedic actors out there that you know what I mean that don't get enough play, in my opinion.
I would say I'm going to say this. I could see Cecily Strong playing Ruthie. The lady who works at the counter at Monk's.
Who would be the soup Nazi though?
Soup Nazi. It would have to
Do
be
you
some.
know, recently I was on Cameo and the soup Nazi sends messages. You can get the soup Nazi to send you a message for like $250.
Isn't the actor who plays the soup Nazi? Isn't he like Lebanese or something?
I have no idea. I just know he's on Cameo and he charges $250 for a message. But he's intense. He's an intense guy.
Yeah, who would play the soup Nazi?
These are questions that the commenters need to answer.
Well,
We need help with our casting.
I'll end with one last casting. How about Kenny Bania? Could you think it would make a good Bania?
Who's that one?
Kenny Bania? Are you serious? He's the comedian that Jerry like really tries to avoid.
Yeah.
You remember the Armani suit and everything?
Yes, I do remember that.
It's gold, Jerry. It's gold.
Yeah, he's very intense. He's so funny. I don't know. Let me see. I was looking at a list of like comedic actors.
Because the guy who plays Kenny Bania, like he looks like someone you don't want to hang around with because he looks so annoying. And when he like puts on that persona, it's like, yeah, I really don't. I can see why Jerry doesn't want to hang out with him.
Yeah, it has to be someone that I don't know. Maybe Pete Davidson.
Pete Davidson, I could actually see as Kenny Bania because he does have that quality to him. Another person I would probably say is have you ever heard of that group Please Don't Destroy? They do those little video sketches.
They filmed here. Yeah.
Yeah.
My husband worked with them. Yeah.
I was gonna say we actually did a review of Treasure of Foggy Mountain a few months ago.
Oh, how'd that go?
I mean, it's all we got a lot of views, so I mean, I'm not complaining. Yeah. I was gonna say Martin Hurley. I could see actually playing Kenny Bania, and the approach to Kenny Bania would sort of be like this, sort of like desperately trying to like ride off of Jerry's coattails and just be like try to ingratiate himself. Not.
I don't know if
he's
too
friends.
old, but Will Forte.
Well, Forte's too nice. Oh, what about Fred? What about Fred?
But he has an intensity. He has that like desperation.
That's true.
Like that. Like how you said he's on his coattails. He's trying to like, I need a suit. I need something. I'm down on my luck. Like I don't know. He has that kind of energy to me.
Yeah, I mean that's true. But I'm going younger here, so I would definitely like go with Martin Hurley.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking of Fred Armisen because Fred Armisen,
He's older.
But at the same time, Fred Armisen, you like whatever role you put him in, like he's just phenomenal.
Yeah, you could put him in anything. He could be the woman at the counter at Monk's. He could be like.
I mean, he did play Joy Behar for a while.
He literally could play anything and is like fill in for a day, and it would be funny.
So we've been going on for quite a while, and I want to go and just wrap this up. So before we do, do you have any like final closing thoughts about Seinfeld? About what it means to you, why it's important, and why people should watch it if they don't know it already.
I think we should watch it just for the culture, just for the understanding. If you're wondering a little bit of what, I mean, it wasn't true to like everyday life was like this, but in terms of the calling to get your messages, what life was like to visit your parents, and you get a bar in your back, like those things were actually so true to life.
Back
the uncomfortable, back then.
Yeah.
And I just watch it with like total openness and understanding that it is a little time capsule from a very quick and brief moment in technology and time in New York City, I think. To get a glimpse of what life was like and how things were done. Losing your car in the parking lot. I remember doing that with my family at like the mall or Disneyland or something, and you just will never forget it. So then you watch an episode about it and you're like, oh, I feel so seen. We didn't have TikToks, you didn't have things that other people were like, does anyone notice this? It's like we only had our TV, and this was the first show to kind of call it out and be current with that. So that's all I had to say. It was a good time. I felt like it's a comfort program for older people.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I mean, especially in our age group. I mean, we're old enough to remember what it was like. If you were out and about, if you had to make a phone call, you had to go to the payphone. And I distinctly remember as a kid, and I may misremember. So please help me out on this one. I always remembered you had to have a dime with you if you needed to make a phone call.
Oh, I didn't do that. You know what I did? I called 1-800-COLLECT. And then they would ask you to say your name so the person would know who's calling, because then they could accept the charges. And then I would just say the message in the name, and then I'd hang up.
Really?
Because if I was at
I thought that was a myth. I thought
no,
I didn't think
if you're at
did
Magic Mountain or something, you call collect and you say, "Come pick me up," and then you let it go through, and then you just hang up. It doesn't. Then your mom would know to come pick you up, but then you didn't have to get charged for it. So,
damn it.
That's how cheap I was. No, I'm joking. I just didn't have any money. I was a child. I needed to be.
And this is third. Yeah. And I had to walk, and I actually had to walk home like a chump. I didn't know you could do that. But
I was in LA. You can't. No one walks in LA. It's not a thing. It's too far. It's too hot. It's not gonna happen.
But I'm totally with you. I mean, to say that this was like, the definitive show of the 90s is an understatement, because it encapsulated so many things going on in the country at the time, and I felt like for a show that was about nothing and that tried to be above everything, it was very, very much tied to the culture. I mean, for starters, can we please, remember Jackie Childs, who was a very not too subtle imitation of a certain lawyer who defended a certain star who got in trouble for doing a certain act and then escaping in a white Bronco.
Yeah.
And there were just so many references and so many things. The one that comes to mind is the issue with the yogurt, and when they were referencing Giuliani, because that was definitely tied into Giuliani trying to get elected mayor at the time.
They would do a bunch of little things like that. That's why if you're like a kid now, or not a kid, but you're young, you were too young for Seinfeld at the time. If you watch it now, there's references in there that will. I don't know if I'd say they were important, but if you want to get an idea of a glimpse of things that were being talked about, and in a silly way, that this was it,
And then
quick.
And they also made mention of the Dinkins campaign too, when Dave Dinkins was trying to run for re-election, and I think it was Lloyd Braun who worked on the campaign, and they lost, and he went crazy. And I was like, yeah, that's what New York politics does. It drives you insane. I mean, for me, the value of Seinfeld is to your point. It's very nostalgic. It's like comfort. It's comfort food, basically. It's what you watch when you feel like you want to remember what life was like back then, because it was a very simple time. Let's make no bones about it. I mean, we're living in an age now where technology is outpacing expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas back in the day, we could only dream of having, a computer that fit in the palm of our hand, and we could just watch like a bunch of, weird things on it. But but I feel like with Seinfeld, if you want to learn how to write comedy, if you want to learn how to write a sitcom, if you want to learn how to write very intelligently and write something that is shallow at the surface level but is also deep, I think there's no other show that you can watch than Seinfeld. Seinfeld was for us what Monty Python was for the boomer generation, if you think about it, because a lot of what Seinfeld did and what Monty Python did, they were both unconventional. They both broke a lot of rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they did it in their own respective way. Obviously, Python did it in a way that worked within their structure, i.e., the sketch comedy show, and then they did 3 movies. Whereas Seinfeld, they had 9 seasons. They followed the conventional sitcom format, but they inverted it and turned it on its head, and turned it into something that was familiar yet was very different. So that's my thing. So I want to end off with your favorite episode of Seinfeld. I can go first, or you can go first.
You go first, because I'm gonna think about it for a second. Yeah.
So for me, it's the blood. Just the fact that you have Jerry, flipping out when he finds out that Kramer donated blood. It's just hilarious. I promise you that is the one episode that I will just laugh my ass off the entire time. Not to mention the fact you get to see George. I think George at his lowest level, because he is just trying so hard to combine his 3 favorite things into one unholy activity, and it has this horrible effect on him. And then you get to see Elaine trying her best to be this dependable person and failing spectacularly.
Yeah.
And I will say this, Kelly Waymeyer, did an excellent job playing the single mother, because on the one hand, she's like this normal person, right? But then she turns around and she is as equally messed up as George, especially when they're talking about salted beets being their most favorite ones. And then they're having sex on the kitchen floor. Plus, Kelly Waymeyer would go on to guest star on Star Trek Enterprise as a crewman before she passed away a few years later, tragically. And Kramer obviously is just being Kramer. I think the funniest thing was the funniest line for me was George making an offhand remark about how Kramer got mugged in the suburbs. Like, that's one of the funniest lines ever.
Yeah.
And also, we get to see the return of one of my favorite characters, Izzy Mandelbaum, and he's training, and he's trying to train Jerry. and that old trope about Jerry not taking care of his car just works so perfectly, where Kramer decides, the only way to cool the car down is to put blood in it. So it literally becomes a bloodmobile.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to rewatch that one, because
That's my favorite.
Yeah. My favorite is the sponge, I think, by far, because I love every character. So Jerry, when he changes his tags on his jeans because he's vain, and he's like, I just want to be a size, what was it, like a size 32 or a 31 or something.
I think it was a 31.
He wanted to be a 31, but I think he's a 32, and he comes clean about it. He's so vain, but he's a straight guy. Like, it's hilarious to me. And then Elaine with her the sponges that are contraceptive, and they're amazing, and they feel amazing. And again, this is in like the 90s, where we're coming off a pandemic of AIDS, and everything was going on, so everybody was using birth control. Again, like, that was a part of it. So she was using a sponge, and it felt super good, and it was like taken off the market. And what makes me laugh the most about this is she didn't even care about why it was taken off the market. It wasn't like, is it safe? Well, is it poisonous? Like, why was it taken off the market? No, she
Yeah.
just goes out and buys 10 cases of them. She's like, I don't care. It's the best thing. Like, I need it. So she gets a bunch of cases of them. And now she's like questioning every sexual experience. Like, is it worth using one of my sponges? Because now they're valuable. It's not like she's valuable. The sponge is valuable. It's so good.
The interview that she does with these guys is just so hilarious.
Yeah, it's really good. So I would highly recommend that one for people who want to do. I think in that one too, they do an AIDS walk. So that's like at the forefront of your mind too. Like this was a part of that era. And yeah, it's a good one. It's a funny one.
Wait, is that the one where Kramer doesn't wear the ribbon, or he just parties all night and then he's too tired? I'm looking.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think.
Oh wait, okay, it is the AIDS ribbon. That's right, and he gets attacked by the same people who stole the armoire.
Yeah. When he gets attacked with that. Oh my God, he's so funny. Anyway, I know I keep saying that. It's just stupid. And then it makes.
And then at the end, George is like.
Yeah, and George is doing like, it's all about sex. It's a great episode. Again, I think it made you feel when you're a kid watching this and hearing about adult relationships and how they're dating, how they're protecting themselves, how they're doing things. It did feel more, it was edgy. It was something not everybody was allowed to watch, and it made you cool the next day. If you knew the references to the show, you felt cool because you're like, I was allowed to watch like this very adult show. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, I was gonna say, like, isn't it amazing at how much they were able to get away with at that time? Because with the way they were like writing these things and just making these references, you kind of wonder, well, like, how is this gonna like get through the FCC? But apparently it did. I mean, it's there.
But that's when everything was getting a bit real. We had to start talking about contraception. You have to start talking about sex because there's a sexual disease going around,
Yeah, that's true.
And in New York, that was very hard on that specific city. Like, I don't know if you've ever read accounts about what it was like in New York at that time, but it was like a plague. I mean, and it was shameful. It was considered shameful because it was sexually transmitted, or transmitted through a needle or something, which there was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of stuff going on. So it traveled. I mean, it's just crazy. So anyways, not to bring things down, but when you watch, no, but it's important to note that because we keep talking about how it's a little bit of a time capsule. Like, here's a show that was allowed to, saying things that were going on. Like, we're doing an AIDS walk and we're going to talk about all this stupid bullshit that brings us down while we're doing it. We're trying to be good people, but but
they're still going to take the piss out of it.
Yeah, and I think that's I don't know if I would say it made it through because it was on at night. It was on late. Wasn't it? I think it was on at 9. I mean, you were allowed to. It was a different time where TV was allowed to be adult at night, and then after hours it was allowed to be adult because kids shouldn't have been awake. That's why they got away with. You could get away with it because it wasn't, and also they didn't show anything. They just talked about stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that it was different for the censor.
Well, I gotta say, for a show about nothing, I mean, it has ignited a huge discussion and debate, amongst many people, whether it's online or just between friends. So, just let us know down in the comments below what you think. Who would you cast as George, Jerry, Elaine, and Kramer? And if you agree with us or if you think we're talking bullshit. But as always, thank you so much for watching. And Allison, you're a trooper. This, like I said, I mean, this is only part 1 of our discussion. I do plan on doing 2 more episodes in the future. I don't know when that will happen because we both have very busy lives. But the next episode, I would definitely love to talk about the legacy of Seinfeld. More importantly, about the so-called Seinfeld curse and if that's really a thing. And I also do want to talk about the post Seinfeld careers of our 4 actors, because Jerry Seinfeld recently did a movie about Pop-Tarts.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I think Jason Alexander, I think the most recent role he did was on the animated series Harley Quinn.
Yeah. But
And
Jason
then-
Alexander is he's an acting teacher and coach. And,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he's very good.
And
he's a big resource for actors starting out.
And then obviously Julia Louis-Dreyfus, she did several successful shows like the New Adventures of Old Christine and Veep.
And she's on a new movie right now called Tuesday.
Yeah, and she's also in the MCU as well. And then Michael Richards. I mean, I would really, really love to have a more in-depth discussion about Michael Richards, because I think he is the one,
he got canceled. He got canceled. He acted up.
I think he's the one cast member who should have had like the most electrifying career, post Seinfeld career out of them all. But like I said, I mean, that's something we'll discuss at a later date. But thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Yeah.